Hello everyone, it's Retro Martin here, and it's time for my next video, and this time we're going to be looking at 6 Metroidvanias that I recommend. Now this doesn't necessarily mean that they're my favourites in any way, shape or form, or that they're the best, but they're 6 random ones rather than the usual assortment that you'll pick up and get recommended by other people. Before we start though, what is a Metroidvania? Well, it can be many things, and to be honest with you, it can be boiled down into basically just being a bit of an action adventure, which can apply to a lot of games. But there are sort of familiar elements in all of them, which can be swapped around or changed, so you can throw in different genres. Like I've played some Metroidvanias that have shmup sections, some that have endless runner sections. So there's no sort of like hard and fast rule as to what exactly it needs to be. But effectively, the main crux of it is it's a large open map area, although again that can differ occasionally, that you explore, and it basically has gated progression. So effectively you can't go to certain areas until you've unlocked a certain ability or a new move, although those are one and the same I suppose, or you've got a key. Modern gamers might liken this a little bit to something like Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order or the Batman Arkham series, where you could only go to certain areas at certain points, or when you got an ability later on you could go back to a previous area to unlock something. And those are sort of the core elements that make up a Metroidvania, which of course gets its name from both the Metroid series, of which you can see Metroid Fusion on the screen behind me, and Castlevania from Symphony of the Night onwards, which is a Metroidvania that actually has RPG elements attached to it. So as you can see, there are a few hard and fast rules, but they can be quite flexible. But you'll generally know a Metroidvania if you see it. So we're going to dive in, we'll have a look at the 6 games and I'll talk about them, and I hope you enjoy the video.
The first game on this list is quite possibly my favourite Master System game of all time, and the first RPG I ever played. Created by West One Entertainment and published by Sega in 1989, this is Wonder Boy 3: The Dragon's Trap, with the less confusing title of Monster World 2 in Japan, as there was already a Wonder Boy 3 in the series, Monster Lair. But it wasn't part of the Monster World sub-series. It gets very confusing, but either way, it's The Dragon's Trap. It's mainly considered an action RPG, but it does have a lot of Metroidvania elements to it. Starting off in a very cut-down, easier version of the final dungeon from Wonder Boy and Monsterland, you rerun the dungeon and fight the last boss again, something that Castlevania would later copy with Rondo of Blood and Symphony of the Night. However, this time when you beat the Mecha Dragon, instead of the end credits, a flame pops out, and when it eventually touches you, Wonder Boy is cursed and turned into a lizard that breathes fire. You then make your way out of the crumbling castle, and the game begins proper. The Dragon's Trap has an open map structure with each area connecting to another, either via scene transition or doors. There are shops all over to buy equipment, and the main part of the game is finding the correct area to go to so you can find the boss dragons, with the end goal being to get the Salamander Cross item to turn you back into a human. Sounds like an open map RPG so far, doesn't it? Well, yes, but what makes it a Metroidvania is the main gimmick. Every boss you defeat will unleash another flame that curses you with another form. Besides the lizard, you'll end up becoming a mouse, piranha, lion, and a hawk, and these 4 further forms all use swords and shields and wear armour. Lizardman can also wear armour, but it's not reflected in his sprite, and his attack is to breathe fire. Overall, because he's your first form, he's quite weak, but he does have a ranged attack to make up for it. The world itself is split up into different areas: a desert and pyramid, swamp, seaside with a shipwreck, a Japanese-inspired castle, and a floating castle. A whopping total of 3 castles in game if you include the original dungeon too. The levels all have multiple obstacles, terrain issues, and enemies to impede your progress, and you have to reach the boss and defeat it without dying, as you are always sent back to the initial town upon death, unless you have a magical flask to revive yourself, of course, but that's a one-time deal. The bosses themselves are all themed dragons, such as Pirate Dragon, Zombie Dragon, Mummy Dragon, etc. They all have simple attacks, so are relatively easy to work out how to fight, but they do take a bit of time to beat down, and being an 8-bit console game means hitboxes can be a bit hard to discern at times, but overall they're relatively fair. The main issue is getting through the slog to get to them. Of course, just changing your form doesn't make it much of a Metroidvania, does it? Until I tell you that each form has a unique ability attached, and later on, you can find rooms to change your form. Lucky players who explore and find some hidden secrets at a certain point in the game can also find a sword that will allow you to change on the fly. As mentioned earlier, Lizard Man has a ranged attack but otherwise no special abilities. Mouse Man can fit through small gaps and walk up walls and ceilings on special blocks. Piranha Man can swim. Lion Man attacks in a 3-block line, allowing you to hit objects below you to uncover passages, and Hawk Man can fly. You can return to some previous areas with a new form to find additional hearts or new equipment, and this is where the game hits those Metroidvania notes. I absolutely love Wonder Boy the Dragon's Trap, and now there's a gorgeous looking remake, as well as the Wonder Boy collection to play it on. You have great excuses to try it out. As if changing animal forms wasn't enough, our next game has you swapping characters and finding moves instead. Heberique, or to give it its PAL title, Euphoria the Saga, was a Sunsoft developed and published 1991 game that only released in Japan and PAL regions. I'm playing the Switch reissue here, which plays in Japanese, but has stills of each text box with the English translations, which can be viewed anytime. I'll be using the Japanese names overall because that's what I'm used to, but feel free to substitute them for the PAL ones if you are aware of the game already. Heberique is again an open map game that uses more traditional Metroid elements, such as an energy meter reflected by numbers, heart upgrades to increase that meter, and the ability to travel wherever you like within the confines of your unlocked characters and abilities. The main protagonist is Hebe, a penguin in a beanie hat who is searching for his companions, O-chan, a girl in a tanuki costume, Sugazaimon, who is a ghost in sunglasses, and Jennifer, who is a green lanternfish style thing. Each character has to be fought in battle and will then join your team. O-chan can swim on the surface of water and walk on ice, and later learned the ability to shoot out ice to freeze enemies and use them as blocks. Sugazaimon can float slowly down from a jump, and later gets an attack that allows them to attack at an odd angle to hit hard to reach enemies. Jennifer can swim, and later learns to bomb certain blocks. And Hebe himself is a very generic character, but can later unlock the ability to climb up walls. Some of the main issues of early Metroidvanias is the lack of in-game map, but Heberique allows you to find a map in-game, which still needs working out but gives you a semblance of connection between the areas. There's also a compass to find which will show you where you are on the map, and some refill elixir upgrades. The bosses aren't too varied, with a lot playing the same and just adding a different attack method in for the second half of the fight. It can be confusing to find your way around, but as you unlock new areas and use your abilities to find new areas and go back to previous ones, you'll start to get a sense of how the map connects. An overall very enjoyable and quite charming Metroidvania with plenty of humour in its text, especially the dialogue between Heavy and his friends and the intro and end scenes. I would definitely recommend picking up the Switch reissue. Circling back round to West 1 and Sega again, this time in 1991, The Dragon's Trap got a sequel with Wonder Boy and Monster World, in Japan known as Wonder Boy 5 Monster World 3, as it's the 5th overall Wonder Boy game but the 3rd in the Monster World sub-series. Not confused yet, are you? This again takes on the role of being an action RPG first and Metroidvania second, but that interconnected map and ability to go back and forth with new gear gives it that added quality of the latter genre. However, unlike The Dragon's Trap, there's no animal form changing here. Nope, this game puts you in the boots of Shion, who is fighting to return Monster World back to peaceful times with nothing but a pokey sword and a lot of guts. As you progress through the game, you'll encounter other towns and have companions join you, though these are relegated to certain areas and will disappear if you go too far. Each companion can help with fighting, though they are very random as to whether they assist or not. They also have additional uses, such as uncovering hidden passages, so are key to getting through the dungeons they are assigned to. Outside of the dungeons, the world is quite vast, with a number of locales and a larger emphasis on underwater than prior games in the series, with you gaining equipment that allows swimming or enabling you to walk in the sweltering desert without taking damage. The main gated concept in this game comes from your equipment, with certain pieces being absolutely mandatory or progression cannot be made. Whilst there are no animal forms later on, you do have a dungeon solely reliant on you miniaturizing yourself to traverse it, and you can remain this way outside, though it will hinder your traversal by a large amount. The game has a good variety of bosses with a giant mushroom, rock monsters, a large fire-breathing dragon, and of course the mechanical final boss, who is significantly easier in the original Japanese version due to having no conveyor belt, which made movement ridiculously hard in the NTSC-U and PAL versions, frustrating what is already a quite difficult boss. The game follows the lore of the prior games, with returning but expanded locations, enemies, and the return of the legendary equipment used in Wonder Boy and Monsterland. In a big coup, the game was also the first time a usable ocarina was part of the puzzle solving, a year before Zelda Link to the Past released, and by usable I mean having to actually tap out a tune on it. Sadly, this isn't utilised much in the game. Overall, Shion's Adventure is a great one for RPG and Metroidvania fans, and with the ability to play it on current gen platforms, with all the useful saving bells and whistles we get these days, it is more accessible than ever before. Master System fans also got a port. The late 80s and early 90s. Some of the best cartoons and characters of all time come from these eras, and one of the best of those was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or Hero Turtles in some regions, whom, due to their popularity, would have loads of games based on them, mostly side-scrolling beat-em-up or action games. There were 3 on the original Game Boy, with Fall of the Foot Clan and Back to the Sewers both being action platformers with great music and style. However, in 1993, when the third game, Radical Rescue, came out, gamers were in for something a little bit different. When Konami developed and published Radical Rescue, it looked more of the same. Great graphics and sound with side-scrolling action. However, very quickly you realise that it isn't the same. You start the game off as Michelangelo on a quest to save the rest of the gang, kidnapped by the evil Shredder. In addition to the usual jumping and attacking, Mikey has a glide ability, utilised by spinning his nunchucks like helicopter rotors to float down slowly. Again, you'd be forgiven for thinking this is just for use in combat and avoiding traps, but after the first screen outside and you enter the mines, you'll notice multiple routes out and you can go back and forth. A quick look will yield a very simple map to show the game as one big interconnected area. Hang on, this is starting to sound like a Metroidvania. Yes, the third TMNT game on Game Boy is indeed a Metroidvania, with you traversing the stages to find bosses and defeating them for keys which you use to unlock the cells dotted about to rescue the other Turtles, Splinter and April before heading off to fight Shredder. Each turtle can be swapped with once they are rescued, and each comes with their own ability to help you traverse, with you being able to, you guessed it, backtrack to find hidden health upgrades using these abilities, as well as move forward with the game. As already mentioned, Michelangelo has a glide ability, Leonardo can drill down into certain blocks to break them open, Raphael can retreat into his shell which crawls along the ground, preventing spikes from hurting him and being able to go under low-hanging areas, and Donatello has suckers to climb up walls. You'll be flicking between the awesome foursome repeatedly throughout, and when it comes to combat, you can use whoever you like. I'm partial to Raphael myself, and I always default to him in the games anyway. Fans of the prior games on the NES and arcade will notice some familiar tunes here, very well sounded through the Game Boy speakers. Again, just like the previous games, this was recently re-released in the Turtles Cowabunga collection on last-gen platforms, along with all the other games from the 80s and 90s, from the arcade and on the NES, SNES, Megadrive and Game Boy. So it's a great time to be a Turtles fan and dive into this one and give it a try. We now circle, pun intended, to one of the series genre namesakes with Castlevania Circle of the Moon, also just Castlevania and PAL regions, for the Game Boy Advance. Another Konami effort from 2001, released not long after the heavily acclaimed Symphony of the Night, and was the first Metroidvania-style title in the series after Symphony of the Night, with the 3 games released in between the two being classic-style action platformers. It had a tough act to follow, and I feel it held up quite nicely. It retains the same RPG elements of equipping items, magic points and levelling up through combat experience of Symphony, but with its own twist, which I'll go into shortly. The game exists at a point in time that isn't really connected to the main series, making it a great point to dive in for newcomers if they've not played the rest of the series so far. Set in 1830, you play Nathan Graves, who after assailing Dracula's castle to prevent his return with his mentor Morris Baldwin and Morris's son Hugh, finds Dracula already revived and is sent falling into the depths below with Hugh. Being left to fend for himself due to Hugh's jealousy, you begin the game in earnest, traversing the castle, fighting enemies and solving platforming puzzles, whilst encountering big bosses at specific points to make your way back to fight Dracula. Enemies have their own drop tables of items with a percentage chance to get them, and some enemies have cards that drop which make up the new unique gameplay system for Circle of the Moon, The DSS, or Dual Setup System, has two sets of cards, Action and Attribute. Each card you collect belongs to one of these sets. Alone, the cards will do absolutely nothing but sit pretty on the DSS screen. However, when you set one action, one attribute card together, it massively changes the gameplay, which you can tailor to your liking. If you're a defensive player, you can use the action card to set a shield, and then one of the 10 attribute cards to determine how it works, and whether it has an element attached to it. Maybe you can pick an action card that changes your weapon from a whip, and again one of the 10 attribute cards to make it either a rosy rapier or an earthly slow sledgehammer. Finding the cards and using them to suit the situation or your playstyle is what sets this entry apart from Symphony of the Night and gives it a unique edge that makes it worth playing. Of course, this being a Metroidvania, Dracula's castle is vast and interconnected with several obstacles, such as Iron Maidens, boxes, poisonous water and super high platforms to block your way. And you won't be getting past these until you unlock the correct ability, item, or hit the right switch to get you through them. Nathan will end up being able to double jump, launch himself upwards, shoulder charge, purify poison water, and many other things to get through this trap-laden locale and fight his way to the end. There are several larger-than-life horror-filled bosses dotted about also to chew your way through, including a more human battle reminiscent of the penultimate boss from Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge on the Game Boy. All in all, there's a lot of game here, and it's definitely worth your time to fish out and play. Of course, this wouldn't be me without telling you there is naturally a great way to experience this game today. Konami saw fit to grace us with the Castlevania Advanced Collection a couple of years ago on last-gen platforms. Not only does it contain Circle of the Moon, but the other two Game Boy Advance Castlevania games with the same ilk, and the SNES version of Rondo of Blood, which is a decent, albeit very inferior port of Rondo of Blood compared to the original, but it's nice to have it all the same, so this gives you an excellent opportunity to give this one a try. Now, I know my channel name says retro in it, but that doesn't mean I have to solely stick with that arena, or I'll be missing out on a lot of cool games. Many of us over a certain age will have fond memories playing Disney's excellent output from the 80s and 90s, such as Castle of Illusion, Lucky Dime Caper and Quackshot. And that's not even including the other properties like Aladdin and The Lion King. Enter the year 2023 and Disney Illusion Island. Released for the Switch only, this game again feels at first like a standard platformer with a co-op tacked on, until you really start to get into it. Then you find the game actually unfolds like a Metroidvania. Not convinced? Well, that's exactly what I'm here for.
Gosh!
This game has 4 characters: Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, Donald Duck and Goofy. Who shouldn't need any introduction? One of the first games I ever played in my life was Donald Duck's Lucky Dime Caper on the Master System, and I utterly love Quackshot on the Megadrive. Another Metroidvania to a degree, and one that might feature in another video. And I'm a big fan of Donald Duck over the others anyway, so you'll see him mostly in this video. Each character plays exactly the same as each other, so it's all personal preference. When playing co-op, yes there's a co-op, you might get into fights over who gets stuck with Goofy, who I still haven't forgiven for smacking me with a giant tooth by accident at Disney World Florida back in 2000, but I digress. Pick your characters and you get dropped into a very odd mix and match of random objects across the landscape. Before I get onto the nitty gritty, the biggest failing of this game is the lack of variety of locales. Whilst there are some obvious ones, like underwater, snow, library, there's so much random weirdness dotted about and it all uses a very similar hazy purple all over it that it tends to look a bit samey. Getting past that, however, leads to a very large interconnected map that would make most Metroid fans blush. The game is very platform heavy and actually has no way of attacking any normal enemies, though you can fight bosses. The name of the game is avoidance and platforming mastery to get around. You will pass lots of areas you're unable to traverse at the start, which really gives the feeling of coming back later. Before long, you'll unlock a double jump, the ability to float slowly or use wind to soar upwards, a slam move, swimming underwater, and more to get around. These moves open up new areas, and there will be a lot of backtracking to find various paraphernalia dotted about, such as memorabilia referencing multiple Disney cartoons over the last century, orbs which are used to unlock sections of a picture which when completed grant you an extra heart each, to photo opportunities whenever an object or piece of background looks like the outline of Mickey Mouse. There's a lot to unlock here on your quest to save the land. A recent update as of the June Nintendo Direct also added in some timed races to show off your platform mastery and a small detective sub-story with you focusing hard on background objects to find the right item and put the clues together to unravel the plot. So there's plenty to do. The co-op can be completely ignored in favour of a solo effort, however this is actually one of the game's greatest strengths. Do you have a younger sibling, children or adults who are new or utterly useless at video games but want to take part? Bingo, this game is for you. There are several difficulty options available from the outset, one of which makes it impossible for you to die. If you get hit, you won't go back to the last checkpoint, but instead, it turns your character into an envelope that floats around for a bit until coming back. In addition to this, the main player one is the camera character. The game world moves with them and anybody that falls behind will do the same as before, becoming an envelope and floating towards player one, or the next remaining player, before respawning. There's also co-op unique abilities, such as the rope, which a player higher up can pull other characters towards them, avoiding some platforming for weaker players, a hug which grants you an additional heart above your maximum, and even a teleport underwater which makes any character envelope up and move over to the main player. Add in the multitude of visible checkpoints through the world and you have a game that is incredibly beginner friendly and will let you play with others of lesser skill as they learn to play games too. Add in that it's a great genre as well that promotes exploration and you'll lure many over to the dark side and set them on the gaming path.
Gorsh.
So there we go, 6 random Metroidvanias for you to get your teeth into and try. Where's Metroid Fusion or Shantae Half Genie Hero? I hear you scream. Well, if I did every single one in one video, it'd take me months to put together and then it'd all be done at once, which isn't very efficient, is it? Look out for another one later where I may explore more games, or maybe I'll look at other genres or collections too, so you can discover some new gems. If you've enjoyed this video, do the usual like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you for the next one.
Thank you.